I'm very conscious of time, and I do like keeping to timetables with these sessions. So I'd now like to invite Mohammed and Peter to join us on the stage. Um, we have one small logistical challenge that Maria must get on a plane. So she's going to give us a large chunk of her voice for the first 15 minutes or so, and then we will move into a more general discussion with you gentlemen, if that's all right, but I think it's important that Maria gets her plane. So, Maria, would you like to, the panel's discussion, the title's The Future of Banking, how the digitalization revolution is changing the roles of banks. And would you like to maybe pick up on what you were saying earlier about healthcare and this concept of, is it going to be the banking system that's the core data center for digitalization because it's about money and therefore, or is it going to be the individual human, or is it going to be DNA banks? Where does this digitalization thing actually, where will its core be?
It's on, yes. I would like to say, as we say in healthcare, citizen-centric driven. And regardless if we like it or not, we need to be mindful and listen to what society is wanted, what society needs. I can put another hat on. I'm an entrepreneur as well, and I started. I still am a small business, and it's crucial for me that my today operation function as it should, and also because of the, as I said initially, that I move around a lot as well. I need for some of this information also to travel with me, and I noticed that before with some of my bank services that I have, that sometimes you need to be there in person to do this sort of thing. So I guess that if the bank that I'm a customer to doesn't provide the services that I need, there are obviously other options out there, open banking and so on, that I don't really necessarily have to have my credit score check and so on, but I can still do the facilities that I need to do from a day-to-day basis. So that's pretty much the answer to your question. That no, I don't think it's, we're observing actually and learning from outside within.
So banking is going to become disintermediated, do you think? It'll just be, we'll see banking like we see buying chocolates or going to the supermarket or going to the doctor, where
I mean, that's a little bit what we see in healthcare, don't we? We're shopping around for different services. There are different needs. It's not necessarily sick care, but we also preventive care, predictions, and so on. And this is also what we've seen in the financial sector as well. So there is a lot of the discussion of the banks and the KYCs and know your customers and all. They want the transparency from me as a customer, but so do I, because I mean, my assets needs to be in the hands of somebody that I trust. And trust is also something really important because it doesn't come naturally. We also have to take into consideration some of the human behaviors as well into this equation.
So I think what you're sort of saying is the banks are going to have to change anyway, aren't they, regardless of whether digital or not? And the digital thing will just make it more efficient for us to understand and know each other and therefore be able to react to each other?
Yes, absolutely. It doesn't have to be from zero to hero, as you say. So that's why I was saying in the beginning that I think it's key to have those options to mitigate that digital transformation pain, because we know that even if the technology is there, yes, in certain areas, we come to very advanced solutions. We also see in healthcare, of course, that the tremendous results, but there's also those different gaps in different geographical areas as well as such in other industries. And there is a room for everybody to contribute to fill those gaps from different industries. So I definitely think that's
the way it goes.
Yeah.
And do you see, because you're chairman of the Blockchain Association, so is blockchain the underlying building blocks, as it calls itself, to all of this? Or and I suppose one of the questions I always ask is, how much of this historical information do we need to know? I can see at the time you need to know information, you need to know that information, but how much do we need to sort of keep and store this information? And if we do need to keep it, why?
Ooh, that's those questions, I get them all the time. So I think, well, depending who you're talking to, but normally I think we have to be clear about the amount of data. I think this is something that we see in healthcare as well. How much data do we collect? This is always a good thing. We don't share more than possible than what's actually needed. So we try to be quite organic with the quality of the data. But if your question, just to see if we are on the same page here, if the question is if blockchain is going to be sort of like the silver bullet for most of the things, depends also how who you have the conversation with. Blockchain, the blockchain philosophy of it was to democratize and decentralize, right? Which we've seen that initially when we started, there was a wave of articles circulating everywhere saying that this was going to change everything. And I think that the discussions have changed a little bit now. We don't really hear that much. So in a way, we so depending on who I talk to, if they're of the true philosophers of blockchain, or are we talking to enterprises? Because now I think in order for us to stay in the market, whoever was working within the space of delivering the blockchain services needed to accommodate our customers. And I think at some point that kind of got a little bit, I wouldn't say destroyed, but it's just not what it used to. Not necessarily exactly what you were asking, but
I think it's something that hasn't yet been really, we haven't come to a firm view globally about what this all means. I often think of cash, once it's been physically made, is the ultimate decentralized thing, isn't it? Because you can transfer it between each other, nobody needs to know, everyone trusts it, and it works. And yet we're getting rid of that mechanism to replace it with this sort of digital thing where everybody knows what everyone else is, well, everyone's recording what you're doing. And so it's transparent, but also it's no longer private.
No, it's not. And I think that this is so regulation obviously has been something that goes back and forth. And I think that the consensus of what we actually mean when we talk about certain things, even in regulation, some of the language is still ambiguous for us, depending on where we work. But I think it has become better. I mean, we had a couple of problems with ICOs in the beginning. And of course, there had to be a little bit of a cleanup after that. And then, but now I think, I mean, regardless if you don't know so much about blockchain, you don't like it and so on, we've seen obviously value use cases they're out there working. I see even in areas where the characteristics of distributed ledger technologies, because we know there are different types, have also fostered a lot of ways of raising money in ways that we haven't seen before. In healthcare, for example, like even for research, using tokens and so on, and, that way of crowdfunding has been revolutionary for us, but also behavioral change, for example, going back to health, public health, citizen health, that can you get rewarded also by using certain currencies and tokens to drive this forward. So that's a lot. I mean, it's huge. We can talk about it for long, and I wish I could do that actually today, because I'm very passionate about it. Yes.
There's a couple more minutes. How many of the people in the room are accountants? How interesting. We're in a fintech panel. Oh, one in the corner over there. So I think one of the things I think is most curious, I think ICOs are one of the most curious things that has emerged from in financial services in the context of distributed ledger. Because the question I ask is, where do you put the coin on your balance sheet? If you issue a coin in return for some sort of cash or equivalent, it has to get into the business's balance sheet, doesn't it, somewhere? So where does it go? And I hear lots of different answers, which to me says that's very curious, because that's a new sort of conceptually new sort of currency. Yes, where does the account? Yes. What do you think?
I would call it an intangible asset. and just put it on the balance sheet as an intangible asset that has a certain value and life, and therefore it depreciates, because accounting has two fundamentals. For every debit, there's a credit. So it is an asset, it sits on my balance sheet, and it's a class of assets. I think 10 or 15 years ago, there were lots of debates about software assets and how you treat them. I think blockchain has its space on the balance sheet and should be recognized on the balance sheet and not as a contingent asset or liability.
Yes.
How about the coin you were saying
We could get
about?
into a very nerdy discussion.
Yeah, we could. Yeah.
We're talking about the coin. The more complicated question is is it a security or not? And different regulators in different countries treat it as, and securities, we know how to treat securities on balance sheet, but in the US, for example, it is not a, it's not, although the SEC would like it to be a security, it is not a security because Congress doesn't agree that it's a security, and in some other countries, there's a stronger opinion. I think that the coin part is actually much less important than the possession, because you said, well, cash is wonderful because it's no question it's mine. I'm sorry, leave cash in a taxi here and then call them up later and say, I left my cash, and I'm sorry, but it's mine, you have to bring it back. And you may or may not get it. If you used a blockchain and that cash is associated with you, you can't lose it until you willingly transfer it through a whether it's completely open or permissioned is, but cash has real problems. It has real risks. The one advantage it has is that it's instant, right? People and no electronic is instant yet, even this newest thing. But with there's no pain, no gain here, and cash has all sorts of costs and risks that this takes away.
There we go. So you're a passionate no cash person.
For small business, you will not see blockchain replacing the high-speed trading in currencies, even though that's where much of the investment has gone in, because it's not better, right? It's too slow. You will not see, and most of where the investment has been, but small businesses, especially if they're trading across borders, oh boy, this is going to be a godsend for them.
But can I also say,
The policies and regulations of transferring.
Yeah.
We are still talking about cryptocurrency. Blockchain is a technology, is not in itself, do not express an economic value or financial value. Is a Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency, because blockchain is a distributed ledger that is used to give immutability to data. They cannot be changed, they are transparent, using cryptography. So it's a different aspect that the blockchain adoption in the financial sector generate cryptocurrency. That is a digitization of something, the bill. Digital currency, cryptocurrency. We call it the cryptocurrency.
I think I'm gonna, because I think I could. Yeah, this could get really exciting.
It's
Yeah,
very long.
could get possibly. Well, I don't know what. But Maria, I know you've got to go in about 1 minute. So would you like to just sort of add a concluding comment, and then we'll move into the rest of the discussion?
I want to throw in a couple of screwballs a little bit. So when I leave, this room will be just filled of discussions as such. So as a small business that I have. So I'm just going to give a personal story to what happened to me before Christmas, and then I'll leave you, and then you can continue to maybe have like a little, it's going to turn out to a workshop, right? So I had some money taken out from my account from Bali, and that was not me, because I was in London at the time, right? So now I was dealing with a bit of fraud. So I called my bank, who is based in a very cute Mediterranean island, and no names. And then I said, I just got this text, and the good part is that it was not that much money. It could have been worse, but if it was for a small business, I need to reinvest. So where does my money go? I want it back quick. So they say, well, send us your documentation within 10 days, yeah? But we need a police report, and it needs to be the original, and it needs to have a stamp. And then I say, well, in the country that I am right now, right, which will be the UK, I cannot go and get a stamp, an original police report, because I have to do it digitally. But this other on the other side, they don't do that. But anyways, we figured it out somehow, and within 10 days, I leave all my documentation, a copy of my 50-page of my passport, because they needed to be checked, so I had to take pictures and so on. So they knew that I was not in Bali. I wish, right? But then again, I was expecting for my money to come back, and I called them actually last week, and I said, you know what? It's been a while. November, right? Still haven't seen my money, and I say, can you tell me when I can see my money? And they go, it could be 1 month, it could be 2 months, we don't really know, because we need to collaborate also with the police departments in those countries where we have seen that. Now, I'm not saying the blockchain will solve this, right? But for me, it would have been nice to see some sort of traceability somewhere. Talking about the transparency, I mean, as I was saying again, the trust right now is not on the highest, perhaps, for me with that bank, but also the importance also to add that layer of security as well, because as I was saying, there's also, it has an impact on my business. It was only £500. I'm gonna get it out there. It was not much, but it could have also been £5,000, and it needs to circulate in my company.
The Central Bank of Bangladesh, where it was tens of millions of pounds. It's the same problem. It's 1920s telex technology, which is governing how money moves between banks. And so when it goes wrong, it's very difficult to get to the bottom of it. Whereas if it's on a ledger where everyone who's a party, which would be all the banks, could have sight, you can quickly see, and yes, there can be mistakes, but you will see the mistake. It is immutable, but you can then do another correction, which is also immutable. So there's what an auditor would call a lovely audit trail. So, so what's going to happen is you're not going to notice anything. But somehow 10 years from now, how we move money across borders in banks, and how things like we know it's organic, but it came from Ivory Coast, or like our chocolate or something like that, we're actually going to really know and be able to know. But it's going to be because this technology replaces the archaic technology that is very opaque that governs the system today.
So I think that's raised it. Maria, I'm going to let you run because.
No, I will. Can we also throw in also the inclusion and stuff, because also my multinationality. So in Sweden, we have our national security number. We use that for everything, for our taxes, for our healthcare, for everything. So that's me all over. And I'm fortunate that I have the system that I can use. But I also want to say for the people that are unserved as well, have digital identity and the use of these characteristics also for them to be able to be part of the system. That's the only thing that I was going to. I'm just going to throw it in there for inclusiveness, because I think it needs to be talked about. So when I leave the room, I hope you continue to do that, but also the ethicality about it, because I do believe in responsible technology, and hopefully at some point we will sort of like streamline this somehow.
Okay, so you've left us a few curveballs as you promised to.
I did.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
But I hope you get to your flight, and thank you very much for joining us.
It was a pleasure.
Shall we give her a round of applause?
Thank you.
Give it to him.
Okay.
We should start.
I was going to say, Peter, why don't you just come into Maria's chair, just because, so you're not sitting on your own at the end of the row. Would you like to just move up? Would you like to just move up one seat?
Okay.
Ah, yes, that feels a bit
keep
more
the name.
friendly. So I'm going to ask Peter first. Perhaps you could introduce yourself and explain sort of why you're here and any thoughts you might have on digitalization, and then Mohammed will ask you to do the same.
Of course, thank you. Even I'm managing investment fund called Longevity Tech Fund. My background is not in finance industry. I'm not coming from finance and fintech field. I'm a lifelong entrepreneur, actually more than 30 years now. And I was always building my companies on top or in emerging trends or emerging mega trends. And I'd like to focus your attention in one mega trend, which is very important for the fintech field. It's called longevity, or someone can name it aging, but the aging is a little narrow definition. So to explain it, what is it about? Current demographic trends are telling us that the people over 55, this demographic group, is growing 4 times faster than anyone else, any other group. It's unprecedented in human history. So the populations over the globe is aging. And of course, you can imagine this press and dangers coming from collapsing pension systems, collapsing healthcare systems, and everything around. But there is also an opportunity, because what we see right now is a series of breakthroughs in science and technologies with capability to prolong active and healthy human life. So actually, this is not just normal demographic curve, but it's an acceleration of this trend. So very soon, there will be more than 1 billion people around the globe over age 55. And within the next 10 years, there will be 2 billions. And these people are controlling more than 50% of the economy and business over the world. So let's come to the fintech. I think that the fintech is not prepared to serve aging population or needs of people within life expectancy over 100, which is not a fantasy, it is a real life. So, for example, imagine investment product. We need better longevity for mics. So imagine insurance or investment products for these people. It will be something completely different than what is currently in the offering. So even challenger banks like Revolut or Monzo, currently addressing youth and millennials, are not tapping this opportunity. So the customer needs will be much more complex and diverse across many aging groups. Imagine the differences between the group 60 to 70 years old and 70 to 90, because they are coming from different ages with different habits, maybe with different digital skills. But they all will have a common expectation to get the much higher value from fintech products. So why? Because these people will be much more active than we already have seen in the past. They will be traveling around the world, spending, and they will be much richer than current elderly generations. So in fact, they will have a more risky and active behavior. So what do we need? We need something like a combination of current fintech products, insurtech, wealth tech, age tech, legal tech, and even health tech to cover that needs. And I call it maybe fintech 2.0. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's some food for thought. Now, Mohammed, you're coming from a different region of the world. What is your perspective on what is happening around fintech?
So, continuing what was said, can I just remove this? It's, I think the room is small enough. Oh, it's recorded, okay. So, if you want, well, my background is, I'm not an expert in, I'm not even an expert in fintech, but what my background is angel investing, and I love and I like the whole concept of investing. So when I see an idea, I want to see how this make people's lives easier. Now, as we said that we have an aging population, a lot of times we see regulations come into place to kind of support, or in a lot of instances not support fintech. So back home, a recent regulation was passed which was to prevent fraud. for payments. So now each bank has a different app which you have to sign in to be able to authenticate internet payments. So this is making payments, one, for the aging population much more difficult. And imagine if you have access to 2 or 3 different banks, you have to install 2 or 3 different apps to get the authentication code to make one payment. So what I want to really see is how different technologies can be put into place to prevent this from happening. So I was reading the statistics. E-commerce has dropped 40% in the past few weeks since this new regulation was put into place, because it's becoming so difficult to make payments. Now, the way that I observe fintech is how can it make life for businesses easier? So imagine you're in agriculture. You have like 100 cows, and you want to insure your farm. How fintech can support this is by having certain devices put into your farm, which can measure the health, the temperature, whatever statistics or whatever data is needed for insurance companies to determine what is going to be the insurance rate for this particular farm. So these are the technology, or these are the events that I want to be seen in the businesses that I want to approach to.
You can see that in China already.
Of course.
JD is doing that with facial and body recognition for cows and pigs. That's what they presented at our previous meetings. And I would take issue that e-commerce is the reason that trade is down. The reason trade is down is people can't move around. Actually, e-commerce is the only thing that's keeping things going in China. If you may have noticed, Ant Financial and WeBank and others have injected new cash and have extended loan forgiveness to their small businesses, which is something that bankers would have been very hard to do with conventional ways of having your borrower relationship. But why can they do it? Because they're offering a different product than bankers have ever offered. It's actually not a loan. And it's particularly important to talk about it in this Islamic part of the world. They're actually extending advances and taking a share of the payments that come in exchange, which from a Sharia compliance point of view, for many in this room, is compliant, right? Whereas a conventional loan with interest is not. Yeah. And because they know that when business picks up, they will get money back, they're able to react in a much more flexible and adjustable way. But what's happening now, because this was my part of the world before I moved back to Washington, is that you can't move around, so the supply chains can't work. You can't get the product to the market, so you can't sell it. And you also, maybe you're doing some home delivery, but even the home delivery people don't want to go now because they're worried about getting sick in China. So it's really, but it's not e-commerce. Actually, e-commerce is actually strong. It would be worse in a conventional sense, is what I think.
I think there's an interesting point. I am setting up a new capital management firm in the UK, and one of our biggest challenges we faced was getting a bank account for a small financial services company. Because the way the regulator has worked is you're in or outside the ring fence, and financial services companies are in the wrong place. And because it's not profitable for the bank to service a small financial fintech company because of the way capital has to be held, that means they don't want to do business with small companies. So I ended up with the chief executive of a brand name bank who was too embarrassed to refuse me a bank account, so I got my bank account. But it took that much to get the bank account, and without the bank account, of course, we couldn't trade. So there's some interesting things around fintech. It seems to be that what we're really finding is that everywhere there's enablement going on because of digitalization, which we're not really perhaps appreciating, but at the same time, in a practical way, we're seeing, whether it's older people or whatever, actually this digital thing, there's a perception, even if not reality, is actually holding us back and slowing us down, which is an interesting observation, which seems to be a common theme.
But another thing which comes to mind is we have defined ownership in the past 10 years since Airbnb came into play, or Uber. So ownership is having a new meaning. So it is not unlikely to see young people who do not want to own a car or do not know how to drive a car, and they don't even see the necessity. Now let's step backwards and let's see how, if someone was born in 1990, and by the time that the 2008 crash happened, they were 18, so they just got known what it means to have a financial trouble. Now, have we defined what it means for them to save? Have we defined what investment means for them? Are there other metrics or means or methods for them to participate in wealth building? But these are the issues that I want to see more often. If you have limited amount of money and you want to invest, how can you invest in, if you have $5,000 and you want to be part of a business, how can you invest this in the stock market with the prices? So how can you, so these are all issues which fintech could possibly help. Imagine if you build, the people who, especially in Canada, they kind of, they buy a house, they flip it, they renovate it, and they sell it. Imagine if you look at this as a bigger business, that people can invest in these and try to, and these are the new areas which we will have to face in the
Yes.
future.
I think it's very interesting the impact on digital native. As you said, because digital native, they are experiencing very new things that we that are aged know. We are assisting in this shift of our society using digital technology. Digital native are more used to because they are born in a society that is already digitized. Most of them is digitalized. So I think it's very interesting your view, Mohammed. Thank you.
Something I'd like to perhaps pick up on Peter's theme, which is this idea of this digital world, digital banking, digital identities. One of my entrepreneur friends is saying he's going to build a digital identity and a hologram, so when his physical body dies, he will carry on living. So if we run with this, in all seriousness, you're going to have a situation where your physical body can die, but your identity will carry on not for just 100 years, but hundreds of years. And it will be able to feed itself digitally and behave and do things in the digital world where it will save and therefore have money to do other things. And what will it be fed with? Electricity? Is it? I don't know.
What is the use case, though, right? The conceptual idea, or I mean, the concept is great. I mean, it's interesting. I would watch it on TV.
Is it?
Sure.
I suppose it's
But
ego.
what is
isn't
the
it?
use case?
The
I
use
mean,
case is ego.
I see most of these.
To the problem
Yeah.
of, are we going to leave the aging populations behind? Well, the question is, are we going to, with voice recognition technology and with biometric IDs, we have the potential to crowd them in. Because, look, my parents are in their 90s. Well, I only have one left now, but I had two in their 90s until recently. And they just found the physical stuff of dealing with a smartphone, even a computer, too difficult. But we have the technology, and with artificial intelligence and voice recognition, there's no reason this can't be just like dealing with a person. And that's where we're going with it. The problem is, again, that people have targeted the millennials for a lot of the digital, I mean, if you know, Monzo and Revolut and Starling and you name all the banks in Fedor and all the banks in Europe, they're not going for the older population, so they're not thinking about this yet. But the technology is there, and if you want to, even if you want to have extra security, which I understand why people want to do that, because under the SWIFT system we still have all this error potential. So we need the extra confirmation, but you can still then use a biometric. You know, touch your finger, scan your eye, talk. I mean, there are all sorts of things that are now in advanced stage of commercial development. It just hasn't been a priority for, and where you're right is that the institutions have to think ahead, because in the rich countries, I mean, I work mostly in the emerging countries where, quite frankly, this is not a problem. We have too many young people getting educated with no jobs. That's the problem. But in the rich countries, it is the problem. And if you want to run a bank 50 years from now, you should be thinking about this. But probably they're not. So you're right to bring it up.
Yeah, most of the problems are actually solving the legacy problems, right? You're talking about the PSD2 SCA,
Yes.
strong customer authentication with the new payment services directive, right? So that is actually solving a fraud prevention problem that was generated in the last 10 years, right? Which was actually created by the PSD1. So the regulators in the market is being reactive to what is happening instead of thinking in advance and taking measures and regulating the environment, right? And all of these guys are sitting on chairs and drafting all of these directives with little knowledge about specific markets, right? Because PSD2 is actually rolled out about 1.5 years ago, and every single country actually delayed it for about 18 months, right? Because no one is ready, right?
It's too hard for the COBOL programmers to fit it into the large institutions. Sorry.
The AS400 cannot handle it, right?
So is this one of the issues about sort of sheer computer power and availability of software people to create these solutions? Because I think what we're talking about really is customer service, aren't we? Do you have any views, Peter, on sort of the complaints we're hearing are all customer service, aren't they? The customer is not being served as well as they might.
Yeah, so I would like to mention that it's related to customer service. So I would expect that the products, so fintech products, will be much more personalized for these future use cases. And using the artificial intelligence, it could be completely automated. So imagine the merge of customer service and fully personalized product adapting to my situations, my needs through different ages. So the technology will help to solve this gap. But on the other side, talking about the capabilities of all the people and maybe their lack of digital skills is going to change. Because I mentioned there are some scientific breakthroughs right now going to be put to the market, which capability to improve physical and cognitive health of all the people. So imagine there is a convergence of these two trends, or maybe several trends. So the aging population, growing this demographic group, advances in technologies, advances in these treatments or procedures, and so everything will end up with completely different situation that we have experienced during past years.
Well, I mean, look, Alexa can do your banking today, and rest assured, Facebook has a voice recognition app that will do it tomorrow. The real question is, and that's why Mark Zuckerberg is in Brussels, but probably for the wrong reasons on his side. That it's, do you really think those guys should have all that data and unlimited control over it? And there are technically ways that we can move sovereignty over data back to the people whose data it is. But we have spent years doing the opposite. And it's long before distributed ledger and any of this stuff. I mean, as we've been developing the modern infrastructure of finance, we've been concentrating data in the control of the biggest corporations. And they, in turn, have rewarded us by doing a better job of serving fewer and fewer people. I didn't say this as a World Bank representative. But that's basically what's been happening. And after the financial crisis, they're bigger than ever. And so there is even greater concentration of ownership in folks that have a sunk cost. And therefore, your point about they're reacting based on what they've been experiencing before, rather than they're not going to be the ones. So how do we, I'm not saying that markets are bad, but how do we need, there's a failure in the market here. And somehow we need to figure out the role of the public sector in correcting this. And that's what Europe is grappling with right now. It's what the UK, which is also very upfront, and even the US, which is a bit weird in some respects, is trying to grapple with this now. Look at all, it doesn't matter who wins in the US, they're both saying we got to deal with this tech company, so much control over so much information. We all see a hazard in it. So, but to get back to small businesses, which is why we're here, you know, the smaller you are, the poorer you are, actually this is not your problem. That's a problem way down the road. This is a rich world, rich person problem that we're talking about, and we're seeing, by and large, as these reforms, these innovations are happening, it's actually opening much more doors than it's closing for small business. It's about how do we get the people that want to help small business, whether they're the entrepreneurs themselves or the angels, able to be using this so it's not monopolized by the people that are not focused on the issues.
I think you raised something. I was wondering if we've only got a few minutes left, but Mohammed, I'd be very interested in, particularly as an Iranian, your view of, we've had a world for the last few hundred years where it was all about storing wealth. And the whole point of the system is about recording and storing wealth, and you're at the top because you have the most wealth, and that's possessions and things. And yet, we're seeing, as you've mentioned, with younger people, they're increasingly having a more fragmented, unitized, we don't need to drive because we can use an Uber. We don't need to own a house because we can Airbnb. So you're seeing some changes where you could see a world where those stores of wealth, which traditionally were what made you the top of rich man in a world where most weren't, where actually that could turn on its head. Do you have any views or thoughts from an Iranian perspective of where you sit in the world and look at the rest of us on what you think might be happening and what that means therefore because banking is actually dependent on this idea that we all need to store our wealth, isn't it?
Honestly, when we've been outside of the news for some time, well, we've been in the news, but in a negative way. But let's just get this on the record that whenever you think of Iran, or such countries, I can talk Iran from first-hand experience, whatever you see that happens in the States, you can see it happening in Iran within 5 years. So I'd love to use that. I'd love to throw this number. The equivalent of Uber in Iran is Snap. Now, Snap has more rides in Tehran than Uber does in London. So the biggest market for Uber still has less rides than the equivalent technology in Tehran. So the beauty of the current globe that we live in is we are so similar that our similarities is far greater than our dissimilarities. So probably when my dad was young, like 80 years ago, probably he was much different than someone young in the States. But now when you see an Iranian, 18, 19, 20, 22, and you bring him out, and you could place him any place in the world, and they're going to be so similar. So it's not like we see the global as any different than it is right now. And any technology that you see abroad is having an equivalent of it back home, or more fitted to the culture, or more fitted to the regulations that we see.
And are you seeing any concepts of a change in how we view money? Or do you think this idea of human beings using their lifetime to accumulate wealth as, because that is the core, isn't it? If that is why we need banking to work better, so we all understand what money and wealth we have. Do you see any changes there, or do you think it's going to continuing? Humans will still continue to want to build wealth and own things and own money. And
I actually think ownership is becoming less and less of a concern for people across the globe. Ownership doesn't make sense. Even having an office doesn't make sense. If before I wanted to work in my own office, I get so tired of living in and working in the office, which was a factory which we had built. My father had built. And it's too close to the city, and it's right now it's huge. It used to be a factory, now it's a warehouse, but it's my current office. I just hate that place. I want to move around. So even the concept of ownership for someone like me, who is not considered like young, is changing. I want to be where people are more dynamic, and I do not want to be working there for all the time. I want to move from that area to another area. Now, even the concept of citizenship is now changing. Now, let's not bring into effect the fact that Iranians are limited in their traveling. And I consider someone in Europe, the concept of citizenship for someone living in France is not the same as it was before. Now, they might not even want to work in the same neighborhood. They might even want to work in another country. And so the whole concept of citizenship, ownership, wealth, savings, investments, everything is changing.
Yes, I think that's what I see is that when today talking about digitalisation and the future of banking, are we actually missing the future beyond that, where everyone's moved into a new concept of what sharing looks like and inclusiveness, I think, which earlier we were talking about. So it's time for this session to wind up. It's been more free-flowing, I think, than I might have originally anticipated. I think we might perhaps thought that digitalisation meant more efficient banking, which we need to serve customers better, particularly the ones who are not being served well, like small businesses or older people. But equally, there's some other looming themes which I think are going to have massive impact, whether it is ESG, longevity, things to do with human behaviour, which we might, if we had the same discussion even in a year's time, be putting a very different focus on what's important. But I'd like to thank you very much indeed for listening and for the very valuable contributions from the audience as well as from my panellists. So thank you very much.
Thank you.